Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Happy Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Sierra, and today I am joined by the amazing Mr. Steve Dale. Welcome to the show, Steve. Steve Dale is a certified animal behavior consultant and travels the world speaking at veterinary and animal welfare conferences. He is the host of 4 radio shows, both WGN Radio in Chicago and syndicated, and has appeared on TV everywhere from The Oprah Winfrey Show to Good Morning America. He's authored and contributed to veterinary books and books for pet parents. His website is stevedale.tv. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Let's get right into it. You've done a lot of amazing things in your career, and we're going to talk about many of the current things and what's upcoming in the course of this interview. But I want to actually start back from the beginning. Your first job was in a zoo, correct?
Yeah, going back as far as animals are concerned, my first job was at a movie theater as an usher, which had great perks, free popcorn, and I got to watch the movies. But my first job having to do with animals was at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago.
And tell me about that. How did you get passionate about animals?
Oh, I always have been. It's my dad. My dad loved, I think down deep he wanted to be either he wanted to be a radio DJ at one time, and he actually had an audition record on vinyl that I still have. His name was Robert Stagg. That wasn't his name, but that was his radio name. And I don't know, he never followed through or pursued it enough, or for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But the other side of him wanted to be someone who worked at a zoo. He loved animals, and one thing that I will always remember doing was watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom with him, with Marlon Perkins. Now, Marlon Perkins was the guy who was in the studio, and he was always 100 years old. I mean, this guy, I had the honor to meet Marlon Perkins, actually. He was the director at one point of the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, but when he did this show, he was the director of the St. Louis Zoo. And he was in studio presenting the other person who was out in the Everglades being chased by an alligator. Oh, God, I'm trying to think of his name. Jim Fowler. That was his name. And he would always be somewhere in the world. Here I am in the air-conditioned studio, and here's Jim Fowler being chased by a rhino. Let's see if he lives. And you saw sometimes what was B-roll. They used what they had. It isn't anything like what you would watch today, but it was the only way at that time. And National Geographic specials. Jane Goodall did several specials where she brought us to Africa. We felt like we were there, and everything we know about chimpanzees, in fact, came from her at one point in time. And watching the other various National Geographic specials. And the great thing of it is later in life, I several times now have met Jane Goodall.
Really?
I could cry almost when I tell you these. When she walked into a room to give a lecture. Now, I interviewed her before that, just like I'm sitting and talking to you, one-on-one. What an experience. But when she walks into the room to give a talk, it's like this feeling comes over you. I mean, I've never met anyone like her on the planet. And I've been fortunate, I've met a lot of people. No one like her. Such a powerful presence, and sometimes a very soft voice, and just the most incredible woman in 50 different ways I can describe. The last time I spoke to her, she was in her suite in Chicago, and of course we sat and did a one-on-one interview like this, and I brought a couple of her books, and she gladly signed the books, and then she said to my wife, who wanted to come with me, she said, "Can I talk to your wife a second?" And Robin, my wife, who you've met, was like, "What? Jane Goodall wants to talk to me about what?" So she brings my wife into the ladies' room, and she says, "Which one?" She had 2 scarves, a red one and a blue one. She said, what do you think will look better for the cameras? And my wife advised her the red one, I believe, and that's what she wore for our TV interview that we did. But I've been so incredibly honored to meet some of the great people who have researched wild animals as well. And one, her name is Birute Galdikas. What did he just say? So there was Jane Fossey, who studied gorillas in the mist, right? And was tragically killed, hence that's greatly what the movie was about, as she was researching mountain gorillas. And we got to see the mountain gorillas 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Life-changing experience. There was Jane Goodall. And then there was a third. That's Birute Galdikas, the orangutan lady. So Diane Fossey, gorillas, Jane Goodall, chimpanzees, and Birute, orangutans. And I actually was a field researcher for her for some time in Borneo. And wow, was that an amazing experience. So Birute wrote too long to talk about now, but her story, her personal story, which included meeting a local tribe's leader, chief, I think, and marrying him in Borneo, and divorcing her husband, who was a photographer for National Geographic, a very famous photographer. All of this is written about in her book, but I'm actually mentioned in her book, which is incredible.
What do they say about you?
Not much. I think she said, I am the only person who had come. She said, first of all, she called me Mr. Funny. And you know what you were going to have for dinner. So you would have, because here we are in the middle of nowhere in Borneo, right? Mm-hmm. And you would know what you would have for dinner. It was either chicken and rice, or fresh fish.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Yeah. And the fish was very fresh. It was caught that day. If you saw feathers in the river, you knew you were having the chicken, also very fresh. And if you saw the fishing net in the river, you knew you were going to have fish. And if you saw neither feathers or feathers, it was just feathers or feathers. What did I just say? If you didn't see feathers, or if you didn't see the fishing net, then you would just be having plain rice. But what an amazing experience it was to get up every morning at like 6 a.m., walk into the forest, through the jungle, and find where the orangutan you were tracking the day before was sleeping. How did they do that? There was no GPS then. I have no idea how they did it. How did they know you go through this path, then cut your own way, make your own path, and then 50 yards to the right, you cut another path, and then you follow this path? I mean, how did they know? But the orangutans do, like all great apes, including us, make their own bed every night, find a place to sleep that they call a bed. All great apes do that, including orangutans. So if you beat them before they got up, then they were going to be in that place you left them at the day before. And that would be the objective, and you'd set up maybe a hammock waiting for them to get up once you found them, and they would be right above you, right? And some of the male orangutans, some of the times, were annoyed because sometimes we'd be talking, you know, the guides, and you'd be waking them up. You were their alarm clock. They didn't want that alarm clock, so they would urinate on you to express their frustration that they were being woken up way too early in the morning.
Wow. You've had some fantastic experiences. I mean, it was. I didn't even know that you'd met Jane Goodall, and it's not surprising to me. But you know, it sounds like your early career was very formative in wildlife and wild animals and in their natural habitats, right? You go to Borneo, you go to all these places, and you interact with Jane Goodall and all of the greats of conservation, right? Now, at some point, you get really into animal behavior, and you become really one of the leading voices on animal behavior. You write books on it, you give many lectures on it that I've attended, you give presentations on it, you've gone on national TV and national radio on it. Tell me about how about that transition, how you got into animal behavior, specifically for small animals that are going to be in most people's homes.
So I was on the radio, playing music on the radio, but I always wanted to do anything that had to do with pets. And would talk about pets, would write about pets whenever I could. and wrote for, at that time, there were cat and dog magazines that were out there, and I wrote for all of them. And the Chicago Tribune one day called me and said, do you want to do a syndicated newspaper column? And the short story for that is the answer is yes. So I do a syndicated newspaper column, and at that time there were newspapers. That is all about pets, right? So I'm doing that newspaper column, and I get to talk because that newspaper column reached millions and millions of people. I mean, I don't remember the number, like 50 million people. Something, wow. Yeah, half the country or whatever it was. A lot of Sunday newspapers, etc. And I get to talk to the best people. And the questions that folks, it was a Q&A column. And while people did write, you know, my cat has a heart issue, what do I do? And I'd contact a veterinary cardiologist. Most of the questions, most of the time, were about behavior. And in one of two categories. Either people were curious, you know, why does my dog go around 3 times in a circle before my dog squats? But most of them, or many of them anyway, were life-saving kinds of things, you know. My cat's going outside the litter box. If you don't do something about it in your newspaper column, the cat's going to a shelter. I did get that kind of thing. So I get to talk to the best of the best, and those are veterinary behaviorists. And I get to learn from them. And over time, I learned a lot just by osmosis. And at that point in time, I wasn't speaking at veterinary conferences. I never would have thought that me speak at a veterinary conference. I thought, you know, but I was attending and I was learning from, again, the best of the best, the veterinary behaviorist. And also some PhD behaviorists as well. But just in the circles I went, it was mostly veterinary behaviorists. And they're brilliant, you know, and responsible for so much of whatever it is that I know that then I can communicate to the public. So I was just a conduit between those experts and the general public. And along came the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. And at that point in time, there was a television show called The Dog Whisperer. And that host of that TV show, who at the moment will remain unnamed, but you know who I'm talking about. He called himself the Dog Whisperer. He wasn't whispering, he was screaming. In dog language, everything he was saying, everything he was doing was screaming at the dogs, being aversive, punishing dogs. And I clearly knew that wasn't the right way to do things. I was on the board of the American Humane Association at the time. And in fact, they had subtitles that they later put on the shows because we complained as a board, this guy's actually doing more harm than good. And they put subtitles up. They wouldn't take the show off the air, National Geographic Channel, because it was making so much money. It was such a popular show. They wouldn't even consider such a thing, though we asked for that. But what they did do, I was surprised they did it, but they did do it, is they put these subtitles up. Don't try this at home. This may be dangerous. This is for entertainment purposes only, that kind of thing. We thought, oh, for sure now people will get it. Well, the ratings only went up. It didn't do anything, you know. But in an effort to fight the fact that at that point in time, too many trainers, because of this guy on TV or whatever, I don't know why, were using methods that were just awful and were causing dogs more problems. Because of that, when the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants was formed, they asked me to be grandfathered in, if you will, as a member. I argued, I'm not even old enough to be your nephew. But they didn't buy that argument, and I was grandfathered in and became a member of that organization. And part of the reason why I said yes is because at that point in time, anyone can put a sign up on their door and say, I am a behaviorist, without any training, without anything whatsoever. And we changed that just a little bit, I think. Unfortunately, now it's kind of going back the other way. You have on social media too many trainers that are using shock collars. See what I'm saying? The dog's changing his behavior. Well, gee whiz, if I electrocuted you for reaching up like that, you're not going to reach up like that anymore, right? but it doesn't mean that you don't want whatever it is up there that you're reaching for. It doesn't change the mindset. It just changes for a time the behavior. And it actually makes anxious dogs, of course, more anxious. There are lots of reasons why shock collars are not a good idea. In fact, I support a ban for those. What did you ask me in the first place? I have no idea. I hope I answered.
No, you definitely answered.
And 20 other questions you didn't ask.
Well, I was asking about, we've been talking about your transition into animal behavior and animal welfare, which, I can definitely see how that works. You start like rubbing shoulders with some of the greats and some of the people that are out there teaching this, lecturing on it, and you learn a lot through osmosis, and then you go out and share what you learned with people, right?
Yeah. That's really about it. And I had one thing that bothers me is that, do you know who Gracie Allen was? Mm-mm. That's my point. So Gracie Allen was a comedian and so incredibly funny. George Burns, you know who he was?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so George and Gracie were so popular on TV for a time, way before his time in the 1950s, before my time actually. But R.K. Anderson, for example, a veterinary behaviorist, the grandfather of veterinary behavior. In the talks that I give, I show slides or images of these people who I hope we don't forget, whose shoulders I stand on and many stand on. He used to call me all the time. He, by the way, created the Gentle Leader, which is kind of looks like a horse halter for dogs, for lack of a better way of saying it. It's still used. He contributed to or wrote, I don't know, hundreds, literally, of published scientific papers on behavior when no one was writing about veterinary behavior. Dedicated a book to him later for good reason. And I'm just touching on what he did. And his impact on behavior was insurmountable. And he'd call me at least 2 times a week. He was well into his 80s at that point. And he'd say, I have an idea. I have another idea. And he'd call me about whatever it was. And I got to know him fairly well. And getting to know people like that was just a blessing.
So I love that journey that you had into animal welfare. And I know that you're specifically a cat person, and you're very passionate about cats. Talk to me about your love for cats and your experience with cats.
Well, in part it's because nobody else was. That's changed a lot. I mean, who would have thought that there could be a place where you can go and meet friends and drink coffee and meet other people?
The cat cafe.
Yeah, but who would have thought such a thing would even exist?
Yeah.
And they didn't begin in the United States. They began in Japan, I believe. And our way of doing that's a bit different. We have adoptable cats at these places, and they just have cats that live at the cafe for the most part. But no matter who would have thought there'd be a platform that you can go to on your phone. That in itself is crazy, right? And just see images, all sorts of images. And the number one sort of vertical of images wouldn't be movie stars. They wouldn't be fashion designers. They would be cats, So cats have certainly taken off. My interest in part began as a result of one cat I had who played the piano.
Played the piano?
Well, didn't you have a cat that played the piano?
I can't say that I did.
Really? Oh, I thought all cats do that. So we had a dog that did animal-assisted therapy. Went to what is now Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. And my wife said, and this dog, a little Australian shepherd named Lucy. And she said, she came home one day and said, you need to teach Lucy a new trick that we could do for the kids. So I thought I'd buy this little piano from Toys R Us, a little kid's piano, and teach Lucy using a clicker to play the piano. And it's, kind of a slow process. You click every time the paw goes up a little bit more toward the piano. I closed the door to the room we were in so our cat wouldn't walk in. And I was like 5 minutes into it. I wasn't very far into it. And she was lifting her paw a little bit more, and in walks the cat named Ricky. And Ricky looks at me, looks at the dog, looks at the piano, and goes, ping, 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 ping. And I thought, what am I fooling around with this dog for? I've got a prodigy. So Ricky, from there on out, and Ricky was a very social, Ricky at that point in time was about 9 months old.
Was he your cat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And very social, would complain whenever the dog, my wife and myself left the house. Our neighbors would hear him complain. He'd scream, "Where are you going?" So he actually wanted to go with us, and we got a leash and harness. This was before anybody did anything like that. Who took cats outside on a leash and a harness? You couldn't even buy a cat leash and harness for a good reason. They didn't yet exist. So you buy one for a small dog, and that's what we did, and kind of fast position it so it works for a cat. And he would go out with us. And then he'd go to Petco and PetSmart and do recitals. We did it for a couple of shelters as well. And I work in the media, so TV quickly learned about it. And soon enough, he was on national TV, aside from being on Chicago TV. All these countries. I remember Japan came. On one show they had, might have been Oprah, but they brought a real piano teacher. They hired a real piano teacher to knock on our door. So you see in the TV segment, knock, 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 knock on our door. We opened the door, and the woman was from the South somewhere, and she said, "I'm here to teach Ricky to play the piano." And she sits down on our sofa with the entire camera crew there, all these people there the cat had never met, had never seen, of course, all this equipment that they had previously set up in our house, and Ricky doesn't care. In fact, he enjoys, it seems, the attention. And the red light, he learned if there's a red light pointing at you, I perform. So he's going ping, ping, ping on the piano. And she said, "Honey, those are the wrong keys. If Luther Vandross can listen to me, you can listen." I mean, she was taking it seriously. And apparently she had worked with Luther Vandross, the real Luther Vandross, in her last job. And now she's working with a cat. It was crazy. And Ricky died ultimately of a kind of heart disease called feline hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It sounds bad. It is bad. There's good news about that, though, but at the time there wasn't. No treatment, diagnosis even, may not even occur. We knew we had it. And one of several things can happen with those cats. One is they could live out a normal life. One is they suffer sort of a stroke-like event again and again and again, very painful, very expensive to treat, and eventually people generally euthanize those cats, or they just die suddenly, or go into heart failure, at which point in time there's nothing that can be done except to make them comfortable, at which point they're euthanized somewhere along the line. So our cat just died suddenly. And I said, you've got to do something about this. Somebody has to. I guess it'll be me. So I began a fund with what was then called the Win Feline Foundation. Now it's called the Every Cat Health Foundation. Same organization. So anyone out there, if you've ever had a cat, if you've ever seen a cat, everything, and I do mean everything we know about cats was likely, the organization's been around 55 years, was once funded by this organization. There's no other like it on the planet that exists only to fund cat health studies. And we know right now, and I had the honor of making this announcement, at the University of California Davis Veterinary School, feline infectious peritonitis, or FIP, is no longer considered fatal. It is now considered treatable. And that is because of funding this organization did for decades, also because of one researcher in particular, Dr. Niels Peterson, from the University of California Davis. Many people around the globe worked on this, but he was kind of the leader in all this. Brilliant, brilliant man. And in any which case, for heart disease in cats, the one I mentioned, the good news is there may be, in fact, I think there is, a drug just around the corner that will effectively treat. We'll see what happens, but I'm optimistic.
It's so interesting to hear, your experience with one of your pets that, and your pet really is a part of your family. Like I come from a family, so it's a zoo up in there. We've got tons of them, right? And they're always such a big part of your life. And, taking that grief and taking that sadness and turning it into action, raising awareness for things like FIP, raising awareness for things like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, right? And now, whereas there wasn't a treatment beforehand, now it's something that's not only well understood, but there's investigations and research going underway that's helping make that more preventable and not fatal. And that, you know, that work means that pet parents and families have more time with their loved ones.
Oh, sure.
And better quality of life for the animal, too.
Absolutely right. I don't take credit for any of that. I'm not a researcher. It's the researchers we funded, and I'm just one member of a board, of many people. But beginning that fund, I don't remember the number. I don't remember numbers. Never have me look at your checkbook. I just don't remember, but it's $500,000, somewhere in there, we've raised for feline hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And now we greatly do understand what's going on with these cats.
You and I could talk for hours.
And we might.
And we might. One of the things I want to make sure we touch on is fear-free. Fear-free is something that's really near and dear to your heart. And it's something that a lot of people may not be necessarily aware of, but it's a really amazing thing that's going on for animal welfare right now. Tell me about Fear-Free, how you got involved, what it is, and how it's impacting pets and pet parents right now.
Right. Okay, so I take no specific credit for the idea. That's all Dr. Marty Becker. And at one of the veterinary conferences, this legendary veterinarian who's done so much in the realm of the human-animal bond in particular, says, you know what, let's meet for coffee. And I don't drink coffee, but we met anyway. And he said, I need to tell you about this thing called Fear-Free. He had just told Dr. Sophia Yin, who since has passed away, about it. And I was next in line, so he told me about it. I knew that this would be, the timing was right, everything was right about it. So the notion is, let's minimize fear, anxiety, and stress of animals when they visit the veterinary clinic. And how can we do that? Well, there's so many ways we could do that, directly dealing with the animal. But let's also certify veterinary professionals to think about, technicians, nurses, as well as veterinarians, to think about not only the physical well-being of animals, but their emotional well-being as well. And the two are connected. I mean, we know that in human health. It is the same in animal health. Beside, if you can't get the cat into the carrier to go to the vet, that cat may not be going to the vet. You are parking your car, the dog jumps out of the car, and the dog looks up and realizes, uh-oh, and now I know where I'm at. And you have to drag the dog in to see the veterinarian. By the time all that happens, if they even get in to see the veterinarian, the exam is not the same. I mean, medically it's not the same. Hearing that heart rate is going to sound very different than a calm, relaxed pet. Even the blood work is not going to be the same. So how can you tell if that pet is just terrified or truly has diabetes, for example? I mean, cats. So there are lots of issues there. And if you can't get the pet to see the veterinarian, difficult for the veterinarian to diagnose anything for a pet they're not seeing. So for all sorts of reasons, I knew this was absolutely the right thing. And he said, we are also going to begin a website, fearfreehappyhomes.com, and that website is for pet parents to better understand, because that fear, anxiety, and stress doesn't only exist in a vacuum of visiting veterinarians. Very often, the pets have thunderstorm anxiety, separation anxiety, big things like that the pet parent understands, but maybe not so big things. That your pet is more anxious more often than you ever thought, but they're not telling us, or at least we're not reading the pets correctly. So let's give pet parents more information, and information that's good information. I mean, there's so much misinformation online, right? About all sorts of things, including animal behavior. That's actually a big one. So every story, everything that is on that website, it's like being peer reviewed. There's a veterinary behaviorist, and or a technician specializing in behavior that actually reads through everything to make sure it's all right. And that is before it gets to an editor that is an expert on pets, not just some random editor that fixes spelling. So you've got all these people looking at the stories that are written and the content that's up on that website, which includes fun content, videos and such. It's a great website. So right now, an enormous number of veterinary professionals are certified, entire practices are certified as fear-free. I've been around veterinary medicine now for decades. I don't remember anything that's taken off quite like this. The timing was right because pet parents actually want this. More than ever before, they care about the emotional well-being of their animals. Of course, they want their animals to be physically in good shape. They, if there's something medically wrong, they want to know about it. But the two are connected. And people now, particularly people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, but everyone understands that. And pets are members of the family, right? So we're willing and want to do more for our pets than ever before. And we don't want our pets to feel anxious. So the timing of this was right. It's the right thing to do. But you know what happened? Here's the thing that's happened. Dog trainers were looking at the veterinary profession, at Fear Free, and said, wow, we can use this too. So now dog trainers are certified. Animal shelters are actually seeking certification, and it's free for shelters, by the way. Why? Because the pets at shelters are more likely, of course, to be anxious and fearful because of the environment that they're in. Dog groomers, even, are certified as fear-free. I'll tell you, every veterinary school, or just about every vet school, has now fear-free as a part in some way of their curriculum. That's huge. Vet schools, veterinary schools, medical schools the same way. They don't change things overnight, typically, in their curriculum. It can take decades. But fear-free seems so clear and obvious. And now there's all the science that's come out to suggest clearly that what we're doing with fear-free is the right thing to do, that animals are benefiting by it, and if animals are benefiting by it, pet parents are too.
It's an amazing story, and the impact for not only the pet parents but for the industry as a whole has been fantastic, and it's been phenomenal. Yeah. So for our last question, looking back on your career that you're very much still in the middle of and very much still active in, what motivates you?
It's been said that what I do has helped a lot of pets. A lot of people have told me that. But really, and it's true for every veterinarian out there, this is my message to veterinary professionals. Let me say that again. This is my message to veterinary professionals that sometimes veterinary professionals either don't think about or take for granted. You're not only helping the pets, you're helping families, because pets are members of the family. So if you are able to improve the quality of life, lengthen the quality of life while improving the quality of life of any individual pet, including guinea pigs, hamsters, pet lizards, but certainly dogs and cats, you're making a difference for that entire family.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate all the difference that you've made from one pet family to another. Thanks for everything that you're doing. How can people find you?
Yes, I love that question. SteveDale.tv. SteveDale.tv.
Well, thank you, Steve, for joining us today, and thank you to each of you for joining us on this podcast. Until next time, stay happy.